for whatever reason, the national pressures have changed, and now you get to play offense, and you get to actually do the things that need to be done, as opposed to just trying to prevent the ship from sinking. So the opportunity is fantastic, and I really do stand by my words, what I said in the previous session, which is it could go any way. It is not predetermined what will happen to this profession from this day forward, and I think the opportunity exists with these people in this room. How you choose to lead, what you choose to do in this profession is the direction this profession will go. And I think that's an amazing opportunity for those who like those kind of odds. You're going to get to write the future. Both W-R-I-T-E and W-R-I-G-H-T. So, back to the answer I gave on the stage, which is the law of diffusion of innovations, which is you don't want to herd the cats. And you don't, the goal is not to convince anyone, right? What we need to do is basically exactly how I built my own career, quite frankly, which is two things. You start with why and the law of diffusion. You talk about what you believe, you talk about what you believe, you talk about what you believe, you talk about the vision, you talk about the purpose, you talk about these things obsessively. You're leading a social movement. View it, think of it like a social movement. And social movements are led by people who have a narrative that is inspiring to people. And it is that narrative that people follow and join and make that narrative their own. That is where we have to start. We're at an early stage. And so you have to become preachers. You have to become preachers for the profession, internally, externally, wherever you need to be. And you need to lead with cause. And don't worry about the ones who stand in the way. Don't worry about them. I can't tell you the time you will spend trying to convince one naysayer when you could have spent all of that energy inspiring others who are at least open-minded. And I'll give you one example. I'll give you two, because two popped in my head. When I was very early in my career, and I was talking about start with why, and I was leading with purpose and cause, and I understood the law of diffusion. I understood that I only cared about early adopters. Everybody else I'll get you later. And I gave a speech to 1,000 people or so, and gave the start with why speech. And the first question, a guy stands up, he was sitting over here, I actually remember that. Guy stands up, he goes, have you ever led a company with hundreds of people or thousands of people? And I said, no. He said, I think you're naive. I think your ideas would never work in the real world, and I don't think you understand a single thing about business. And my answer to him was, so then don't do it. Next question. What do you want from me? You want me to stand here and be like, no, you're wrong, I'm right. I don't care. And I'm not going to pick a fight. Because the amount of energy I have to convince somebody, it's like, let's debate if God exists or not. That's just going to go nowhere, right? You have your beliefs, I've got mine, you follow yours, I'll follow mine. And I'm going to look for people who believe what I believe, and you do whatever you got to do. And I'm okay with that. And what the problem is when people pick a fight with you, and you get those naysayers, you're taking the bait. They're looking for the fight. They're looking to prove you wrong. Just disengage. Why take the bait? You're an idiot. You don't understand. I hear to hear. Simon talks about business. This is not a business. This has nothing to do with it. I've heard it, of course. It's like, newsflash. 100% of the people who work in companies are people. 100% of people who put on a uniform are people. 100% of the general public you interact with are people. 100% of customers are people. This has nothing to do with business or cops. This is about human beings feeling safe and heard and seen and understood by other human beings, whether you share the uniform or not. That's all this is. This is the most basic human being stuff, and the leaders that we need understand that you are leading human beings. You can't lead an organization. You can only run an organization. It's processes and systems. You can only lead people. And that skill set is unique. It's not like being in operations. That's running a system. Leading people is something profoundly different, and most police organizations have sub-adequate training on how to lead human beings. It's not a criticism, it's an opportunity. We can fill those gaps very easily. They're not difficult to fill, and some of them are inexpensive. So if anybody says we don't have a budget for it, have book clubs. Some of the early adopters who are in the curve also didn't have budgets, and they said, well, let's start a book club. And they started buying leadership books and having only volunteers. You don't even have to force your cops to do this stuff. volunteers who wanted to be in the book club, and they would get together on a weekly basis and discuss a chapter. That's called leadership training. You're engaging with new ideas. Watch a TED Talk, discuss it. This stuff is easier than you think. And it's one of those traditional things. You take the test, you pass the test, you get to be a line level leader. And it's not that the tests are wrong, it's that they're incomplete or inadequate, right?
Correct. Some are better than others.
Some are better than others, and that combined with is probably the right thing to do, right? And as I said before, if you're good at your job, that doesn't necessarily qualify you to lead others to do that job. A great salesperson doesn't necessarily make a great sales manager, because you're no longer selling, you're now leading others how to sell. And you don't have to be the highest performer to be a great leader. Tommy Lasorda, so-so ball player, great coach. Isaiah Thomas, great ball player, terrible coach. There's no correlation between how good you are at the thing and how good you are at leading other people to do the thing. And so I think one of the things that we need to build into the system is better metrics and better standards for reviewing those more human characteristics, like the Marine Corps, like the characteristics that indicate good leadership. Are you taking counsel from other people? Do you take their ideas? Do you consider them? Are you decisive? If things go sideways, how good are you at picking up? How good are you at making other people feel seen and heard? Do you command trust? I'm a great lover of peer reviews as well, but not as a mechanism for promotion. I like peer reviews as a mechanism for feedback and training. So we do peer reviews in our organization, and we do not use, they're not kept on file, and we do not use them for anything to do with promotion. We use it as a feedback tool because we want to see people get better at doing the things, and those that are more open to that kind of feedback tend to outperform and do better later on. So I'll tell you how we do it because it's helpful. Sit down with a group of people who work together. We define a team as a group of people who have a regular interaction with each other, right? So it doesn't matter what their job function is. And we have them fill out a form prior. What are 3 specific examples of your biggest weaknesses or the areas you need most improvement? 1, 2, 3 specific. Then what are the 3 specific examples of your biggest strengths or the areas that you believe you've grown the most? 1, 2, 3. We collate them all, share them with the group, then we come together for a few hours in a room, and one by one, you read your own weaknesses, and then everybody else gets to add to the list. But here's what we do. This is very important. There's a speech that's given before the whole session, which is, these sessions are designed to help you. The people in this room don't want to give you the feedback they're going to give you because it's hard to tell you the truth, and it's easier not to tell. They don't want to do this. But they're going to do this to help you. So when they tell you something, say thank you. If you disagree with it, you think they're out of line, you think it's just, then ignore it and go on. It doesn't matter. If it triggers you, like you get angry or something, it's because it's probably true. Because if you have an emotional response to something, it means it's probably true. And so, thanks for that. What I have learned is the most important thing for human beings who are managing gray, managing uncertainty, is to come together in community. And I have a very specific definition of community. Community is a group of people who agree to grow together. And I think for cops to be able to come together, sit down, by the way, chiefs should be doing this amongst other chiefs too, but to cops to be able to come together, preferably led by the chief or somebody in a command position, to just talk about how they feel about these times, how they talk about feeling about their jobs. And it'll be uncomfortable to start, but I've done this with chiefs, where we've just, and I always go first, and I say, here's what I'm struggling with, here's my insecurities, and here's why I struggle in my job. And I'm being honest. And one by one, others start to talk about their insecurities in the job and their fears, and where they're getting it right and where they're getting it wrong. And even the folks who don't speak at all, because we don't make everybody speak, whoever wants to speak can speak, come up to me afterwards and go, thank you, I needed that. And that safety, that catharsis is really important. Now, some of you, as you're hearing this, you're thinking, no, Simon, you don't understand our culture. There's no way I can put a room of cops together and we're going to have some sort of open talk about how we feel, right? First of all, for any of you who've worked in the military, served in the military, that's exactly what it's like in the military. So don't get me into this machismo nonsense, because some of the most human organizations are military organizations, and they do this. I've hugged more people in uniform, cried with more people in uniform than I've ever hugged or cried in any other culture. So let's dispel that myth. And if you're a student of leadership, which I know you all are, I encourage you to read the Harvard Business Review case study of the Shell Ursa. I also wrote about it in a book I wrote called The Infinite Game. I wrote about the case study. Barnes & Noble, read it there too. The Shell Ursa, when it was built in the mid-1980s, was the largest offshore oil rig in the world. And I mean, talk about a rough, tough profession, very, very dangerous, lots of machismo. And obviously the concerns were very high that a rig that large, that performance and safety were significant concerns. And so the guy who was in charge of the Shell Ursa decided to do something that had never ever been done before in his industry, which is he took his crew months before they were going to be deployed onto the rig, and they sat around and talked about themselves and their families. And they got to learn things about each other that they didn't even know about each other. That, like, one person has a kid who's struggling with, health conditions and may or may not survive adulthood. Like, nobody even knew that he had a kid, let alone a kid who was struggling. And there were tears when somebody talks about their son who's potentially dying. I mean, there's going to be emotion. And they learn to just, hold space. They learn to listen as opposed to try and fix. And when they were finally deployed onto the rig, these guys were so comfortable with each other. They were so comfortable with each other that asking for help or saying, I made a mistake, things that they would never have done before, became easy. And the Shell Ursa's performance was way higher than any other rig in the industry, and their safety was also through the roof. Because people admitted that they got things wrong. People admitted they set it up wrong. People asked for help before things broke. I cannot underscore the power of what it does to human beings, and more importantly, what it does to teams when we feel safe to ask for help. And good leaders do the work to create an environment in which people feel safe to ask for help before they need the help. You can't wait until the day something breaks and be like, why did you ask for help? It's like, well, our culture doesn't really allow for that, boss. And like I said, we have to just dispense with all of this, you don't understand our culture stuff. All I understand is if you have human beings, and some of them are struggling. And all they need to know is that they're not alone. Sometimes that's all they need. So this is the problem with the status quo, right? The status quo will always be defended by those who benefit from it, right? And the older you are in your career, please don't change anything. Everything's going just fine for me. And these are difficult periods, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is a high-stress period, right? And the reality is you take an infinite mindset, because the goal is that your organization outlasts those people. So if you have no influence, and by the way, this is the single most common question I get from every sector, private sector, public sector, which is, what if we believe in your stuff, but the leaders don't believe in this stuff, right? Don't worry about it. It goes back to the question, the answer I gave some before, just ignore. Manage well, you still have to manage up, there's elements you can do, but you don't have to be in a position of leadership to be the leader. So if the people that who are, as you talked about, in your sphere of influence, make sure that they're coming to work and feeling seen and heard, making sure that they're going home fulfilled, make sure that they feel like someone's there. If they need help, they just want to talk. And it doesn't always have to be deeply emotional stuff. It's like, hey, show me again how to make this thing work. It's just creating reliance and trust. You can build these little pockets of magical leadership inside organizations. And what usually happens is a couple of things. One, those little groups tend to be higher performing, and so leadership tends to leave you alone. Or, if they're curious, they ask you, what are you doing? And you get to share. Or, those teams protect each other because they're all in it together, so they stand up for each other, which is great. To lead comes with risk, right? We know this. Like we said, you get all those perks for being in a position of leadership or for being a leader, but those perks come at a cost. And it is lonely, and it is difficult. And when everything goes right, you have to distribute the credit. When everything goes wrong, you have to take the responsibility. That sucks, right? But sometimes, yeah, you might lose your job as a result. And I don't think anyone here is afraid of risk. You chose a job that you could lose your life, but you thought that the contribution to society was worth that risk. And so this may be one of the sacrifices, being a short-term, insecure, bad leader who's going to exercise, their authority to teach you a lesson. And the great news is, this is a small industry with a lot of whisper campaigns. Everybody knows who you are. You'll get picked up and you'll go do your thing somewhere else where you're more welcome. So it's the hard truth of it. But worry about the stuff you can control. And be that student of leadership and start that book club with that group, and you'll find you have more protection than you realize because you're group protection.
Really, honestly, it's we have to teach them how to teach it. 18,000 agencies. I've been a leader in large and small agencies. How do we infuse that and teach it?
Well, thank you very much. Your pushback sounds more like an affirmation than pushback, so I appreciate that. So the good news is, there's a lot out there. Like I said, it goes back to that law of diffusion, right? I understand there's a group who are hungry, who need those tools. And those tools will come. They have to come. But there's a group here on that adoption curve who are able to take a book, take a TED Talk, take a lesson they've learned from somewhere else and be like, okay, how do we translate it to here? How do we do a bad job of this ourselves? And that's where it starts. And so the good news is, whether it's my work or somebody else's work, there's a lot out there. And it's a little bit like, here's how I'm interpreting the question, right? Simon, we really want to get into shape. We have the mindset to get into shape. We're ready to get into shape. What we really need you to be is our personal trainer. And so we're going to wait and stand on the sidelines until you're ready to be our personal trainer. And my answer is, there's so many videos and so many books and so many things that you can start with. Well, Simon, do we start with the arms or the legs? Yes, start. Yes, I don't care. Start. And I have a philosophy about innovation, which I think applies here. I'll give you the whole philosophy, even though it's completely irrelevant. Just because, I have the microphone on the spotlight. So. But I think it applies to this as well. So really, really quick and simple. So any kind of innovation exists on two axes. There's those two axes. I don't have a pad. There's performance and there's time. And you have to start off with a vision of what you're trying to build, whether it's a website, or build an entirely new culture, or build a leadership program. Like, you have to have a sense of what it is, right? I call that the imagined vision. Wouldn't it be great if our website did this? Wouldn't it be great if we had a leadership program that did this? I actually realize this is very relevant to what we're talking about. And what you try and do is build it. And it goes in sort of steps, right? You said it grows, it sort of plateaus, it grows. And eventually you build the thing you were trying to build, a leadership program, a new culture, a website. Never quite works the way that you imagined it. So now what you do is you spend all your time and money trying to fix it to make it be the thing you said it was going to be. Okay, that is a very old-fashioned way of thinking about innovation. The way to think about innovation is completely different. You still have to have the imagined vision. You still have to have the thing you're trying to build, except you don't actually try and build it. What you do is you say, what's the fastest, simplest thing we can do with the highest probability of success that takes us just one step towards that vision? Build that. So maybe you don't need a whole leadership training program. Maybe you just need a book club. That's fast and simple with a high probability of success. So you just have a quick win. And then you say, okay, what's the fastest, simplest thing we can do with the highest probability of success that either improves on the thing we just did or takes us one step closer to the thing that we're trying to build? And you do that, and you keep iterating, and eventually what happens is you completely blow past the imagined vision and you end up building the unimagined vision. So for example, this is how Netflix came to be. They only imagined having a video rental company that would have streaming. They never imagined having a studio. It's because they had this fast, simple, with the highest probability of success, iterative process, and they blew past the vision. Amazon, the vision was an online bookshop. That's it. And now, look what Amazon is and AWS. It's because they have this iterative process. Tesla was only supposed to be an electric car, now you can power your house. Because they weren't fixed on trying to build a thing, they just took these incremental steps. And so don't worry about building the complete program. Worry about the fastest, simplest thing you can do with the highest probability of success. And what you will eventually build over the course of time is something way more dynamic and bigger than whatever we're talking about. You cannot start a press conference with most cops are good cops. And I understand where it's coming from, which is you feel that you need to protect the homeland, protect your agency, that you think that your cops need to hear that out loud. You should have done that work in private with your cops first. Like you need to have those blunt, honest conversations. I can't have another conversation with another police chief telling me, most communities love us and most cops are, I'm like, then why are we having this conversation? Why am I even here? Clearly something's wrong. So take some responsibility. Those honest conversations, those hard conversations have to happen before. The press conference is not for the cops. The press conference is for everybody else. And what the public desperately needs is a chief who's willing to take responsibility for whatever happened, or has a point of view on what's happening, even if it's not your agency. Imagine it's you have a fight with your spouse. You have a fight with your wife. You did something, whatever you did, right? And she's yelling at you.
She probably did something.
Yeah. I already know that. This is just hypothetical. And you say, honey, most of the time I get it right. Most of the time I'm very good. Most of the time I say the right thing. Tell me how that's going to go. Okay? It's because you're not listening. Right? In other words, leading with most cops are good cops. Most communities love their... You're completely missing the anger. You're completely missing the point. You're completely not listening to what is being said to you. And so when we lead with that, it's the same reaction you're going to get from your wife, which is like, you don't get it, do you? It's the same thing. It's just human beings. It's just human beings. We have to make sure we're getting the right people in the organization in the first case, And I think too many organizations either lowering their standards or recruiting to the wrong standard, like come in and kick doors down every day. Yes, that may happen. Won't happen every day. Getting the wrong mindset versus people who want to live a life of public service. So I think one part is, have we filled the ranks with people who probably shouldn't be cops, right? That's number one, which is a different problem, but it definitely contributes. And I think there's, I know the murmurs. I know what the private conversations are. I'm fully aware of the roles the unions play. I'm fully aware of it. And I've heard the stories. I know one chief who was dismissed, fired in her chief career. I think the number was 17 cops for really abhorrent behavior, sexual assault, things like that. I think 13 or 14 of them got their jobs back. And no one in this country, certainly not politicians, have the courage to say part of the problem is the unions, which is all those, most cops are good cops, but the bad cops are being protected and you're being forced to rehire them. And there has to be a collective courage to come together and not criticize or attack the unions, but to get together with the union and say, listen, we're actually on the same side here. What we want, my friend Bob Chapman, he bought a company, and he had his first meeting with the leadership of this new company that he just bought. It's a factory he bought. And the first question from one of the people at the table was, what are you going to do for our union? And Bob's answer was, oh, I don't give a shit about your union. What I care about are the people who work in this factory every day, and I assume that you care about the same thing as I do. So what are we going to do to take care of these people? And I know the rank and file begrudgingly pay their dues and begrudgingly join the unions. Like, I know this. And there's I've lost some of the audience by even having this conversation out loud. But the fact of the matter is we have to take, which is the secret that we all know, the open secret that we all know, We have to take the implicit and we have to make it explicit. Because we need pressure on the unions to work with the chiefs and the sheriffs, not against the chiefs and the sheriffs. There will be times that will be adversarial, but that doesn't have to be on a daily basis. We care about the lives and the mental fitness of those who put on the uniform and volunteer and come and work in these organizations first and foremost. What can we do to protect them? Not just their lives, their livelihoods, and their mental fitness, and how they feel about coming to work. And those conversations have to happen. They're difficult conversations. And we can't just wait for contract negotiations to have those conversations about these things equally. That's not how brains work, right? And I'll give you a real life example. Let's say I'm a leader standing on stage, and I go, my number one priority is performance. And I know if we take care of our people, we will meet and exceed our financial goals. Okay, scenario 2. My number one priority is our people. And I know if we prioritize our people and take care of our people, we will meet and exceed our financial goals. Which company would you rather work for, A or B? It's so obvious, it's stupid, right? And so, going back to your original questions, how do you measure these things? High-performing teams will perform better over time than a team that's simply driven by the numbers, right? And so what you'll find is that the trend data doesn't have to be on absolutes, like how did we do in December, right? But you'll find that the trend data, traditional metrics, actually will increase and do well over time when you focus on the people stuff. So you still can use traditional metrics. I have no beef with them, right? Then you talked about, well, how do you measure culture? I think asymmetrical metrics need to be introduced into policing, right? So asymmetrical metrics include things like how much money are you spending on healthcare, right? Like though it's anonymized and it has to be, we know, we can find out from our insurance companies how much money is being spent on antidepressants, right? And I want to see that number goes down. I want them to feel healthy and feel like they can rely on each other, right? I want to look at divorce rates. I want to look at rates of heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. Because what I do know is that high stress and high cortisol weaken immune systems. And when you have high stress and high cortisol, those organizations are going to tend to have higher rates of cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. I want to look at all these asymmetrical things. You cannot ignore retention. People want to stay here. They don't want to leave. You cannot ignore the number of people who bang on the door from other agents saying, please can I get a job, please can I get a job, because turns out word spreads where the good places are. Right? Everybody knows where the good agencies are, and everybody knows the agencies to avoid. And agency that says we have to lead with money, well then you're going to recruit people who want money first. You have to be fair in how you pay. But to lead with money means that's what you're going to get. Versus say, if you want to come work for an organization that believes in redefining the profession of policing, not law enforcement, the profession of policing, so that we can change this profession for the better for generations to come, guess who you're going to recruit? And so all those slightly asymmetrical things, which include things like retention, we got to measure. We start to put them on the decks when we recruit how we're doing. And I care way more about trends than absolutes. Somebody in a leadership position, they're going to get the young, susceptible ones on their side as soon as possible. There's a few ways to deal with it. One is I'm very public about this is what the vision is, this is what the mission is. I have an expectation that you're taking yourself on and you're contributing to it. Don't believe in it. I'm actually okay with that. Then just come to work, punch the clock, do good work. I'm not asking you to blow the doors off. I'm asking you to do good work and go home at the end of the day. But the minute you start to get in the way of the work we're trying to do, the minute you try to start to sabotage, then we're going to have a problem. And so I'm very public about, you don't actually have to buy into it. You just can't get in the way of us trying to do it. Because then that sets the tone when I want to go knock on someone's door and be like, remember that thing I said about come in, do your work, wait for retirement that I don't really have a problem with? I've heard that that's not going according to plan. And I want to talk to you about that, right? And I think it's the right thing to, when you're open about the things that you're doing, I think the rank and file can hear that. I'm a great believer in making the implicit explicit. My favorite one is, lots of people think what you're doing is hurting our agency. And I'm like, how many? I've talked to many. Usually it's one. And it's your bud. Many. And then we start getting all freaked out because it's many. It's probably two. Right? So I think taking the stuff in context and knowing who the messenger is, and I always say, tell me who it is so I can help them. I can't violate their trust. I'm like, okay, you gotta give me something. Because you just give me generic, like, everything sucks here, like, there's actually nothing I can do, and I'm just gonna ignore you. Because you're not helping me. Like, give me something to grab onto, and I can fix it. I can work with it, I can have a conversation with somebody, you know? But if you're gonna give me nothing but a complaint, I literally can't do anything. As much as I want to. So I think as much as we can, make it implicit, explicit. Also not making a big deal of things. Like, it's like the example I gave about dealing things with confidence. Like, we need to have a very serious conversation. Right? Versus, hey, you need to talk about something that's a little screwed up. Hearing a little stuff, not blaming anybody, just hearing stuff, reacting to it, want to just nip it in the bud. I'm guessing it's not true, but I want to ask you just to make sure this is what I've heard. And then you go into listening mode. And believe it or not, very often the people who are noodling at a culture, sometimes they have other issues that aren't being addressed. We have a rule, which is if the reaction is above a 5, it's about something else. Right? Like, think about it again in your personal relationships. Like, why do you always leave the fridge open? It's not about the fridge. Most of the time, I close the fridge. Don't do that. I'm just a great believer, and again, I'm talking about communication, but part of the lack of leadership training is we don't teach people how to communicate. And I saw it after George Floyd. I saw it in policing organizations, I saw it in the private sector, I saw it everywhere. After George Floyd was murdered, the number of leaders who chose not to have a conversation about race with their teams or their organizations was uncomfortably high. Not because they're bad people, it's because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing, inflaming the situation, or triggering someone. And so they opted to do nothing. Not bad people. They lack the skills of how to have a difficult conversation. I need to have a difficult conversation with you. I'm afraid to have this conversation because I fear that I'm going to say the wrong thing, I might trigger you or get this wrong, but I believe that having this conversation is more important than my fears of getting it wrong. So I need you to work with me because I might stumble and fumble, and appreciate what I'm trying to do here because we have to have this conversation. Can I have that conversation with you? And I always ask for permission. And now you can have a very difficult conversation with why somebody's being a pain in the ass in the organization. Because we're not coming down and screaming and yelling at them. We're coming down on bended knee to try and find out what the issue is.